being expected to work in that. It's just absurd the way you work. It's like, I mean, it's great, but it's killer. And it doesn't allow people who, want to have babies, men and women, everybody who wants to have babies or things like that, or just go to the park and have sports. So I think calming down your expectations a little bit is the biggest mental health problem I've seen. And I think the other thing is that, um, as Ashley mentioned, you get paid by people who have a lot of money to make buildings, and you don't get paid to do anything else. And yet many of you are people of deep conscience, and you're certainly people who are aware of the ecological crisis that we are currently in. And so I think that must create a lot of strain between your understanding of where the world is at and what you can get paid to do. So those are problems that I see.
Thank you.
Did you just see to our soul?
I'm
gonna need a minute to go cry.
I know, I was about to say just that you hit on so many topics and just I don't want to speak for everyone here, but I just felt so seen right now. And I just really appreciate your words, Mindy, and Erin and Ashley, what you do as well. But we could have so many more people like you in society. I think that's a good reminder for all of us to hear. I do know that from an academic standpoint that a lot of schools are really trying to work hard towards changing that culture that leads us into the profession. And that way it'll hopefully also change as they get into the workforce. And that's not acceptable behavior anymore for management or for academia to encourage all-nighters or push for that direction. So I hope there's some change coming the way. I know that we speak a lot about that on the education boards that I'm on. My next question for Erin, I'll bounce this one to you. How do you feel your identity impacts your daily life, your professional practice as an architect, and your well-being? I do love that you started out your dialogue today touching on some personal aspects that can to and tell us more.
How does my identity affect my personal life? I mean, so much. But I mean, I would just start with like my identity, at least part of my identity is that I was born with is as a white middle-class educated person that has outrageous privileges and is well aware of it because of how I was raised, because of a mother that was dedicated to service and a father that's a primary care doctor for people without insurance, also dedicated to service. And so I think, I have known my whole life that I want to spend it dedicated to serving others. And architecture found me. Like I was in environmental psychology and architecture found me. And, I think continually weaving my own lived experiences. I will say when I was younger, I did not weave. I was very by the books. And so I understand, like sometimes it takes a little comfort to get there, but don't be afraid of being who you actually are because the world needs that.
Thank you. It's very encouraging words and I appreciate it. Ashley, let's get in a little personal with you today as well. Who or what inspires you and your work? I think that our audience was really impacted by some of the slides that you shared and your personal experience as well. So I want to hear a little more about you and what inspires you.
Thank you for that. I've found that other people who are passionate inspire me, and it's not necessarily one particular person or a type of person. I've always felt like you could learn something from anyone, which is, a big part of the work that I do is about listening and seeing the expert in everyone. I'll say that my family's a big inspiration for me. As many sacrifices as they've made for me. I'll also say, to speak to the kind of spiritual aspect of it, I do believe in a higher power, and I feel like it's whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but whatever it is has kind of held me in situations and places where I've felt alone, I've been able to kind of lean on that. And that's given me courage where maybe I don't necessarily feel like I have that myself. So, you know, and just the idea that of being a person that makes mistakes, and this entity is just has your back. It gives you kind of comfort in that way. So, you know, everybody.
I love it. I love it. I love getting a little personal too with our panelists as we get into talking about you know, the more specifics and the facts, and let's get into kind of the detail of what it is that you guys do. I know we got a glimpse of it in your intros. I want to ask you, Aaron, let's start with you on what you think is a common misconception related to mental health and equitable design. I have a lot of expertise in this field, and I'm really curious about your take on that.
Well, I mean, I think kind of the most obvious misconception to me is like, I don't know, this otherism of it. It is simultaneously like the otherism and the like mental health versus mental illness. So, I mean, sorry, I'm like trying to condense my treatise. I think
Take your
one,
time. Take your time. We want, the audience wants to hear it. We want to hear it.
Yeah, I think number one, you know, we got some great questions about essentially like how infrequently we normalize talking about mental health, and it, like, to me, it spurs from medicine in a lot of ways a long time ago, saying, you know, separating the mind and the body, and that we now understand that that is not true, and that, I mean, hopefully a lot of people have understood that consistently, but that our brains, you know, the thing about loneliness is we think about loneliness, for instance, just as a mental or social condition, but we understand all of these massive physical health impacts and all of these massive economic impacts. I think a lot of times mental health is sort of put in a different box than having, for instance, diabetes. But, you know, they're both determined by your genetics and a little bit of your lifestyle and a lot of adverse childhood events. And I think it's just really important to understand how prevalent some form of mental health struggle is in our society, and that talking about it, normalizing it in sessions like this is incredibly important.
Yeah, I know that, you know, Georgia last year, you talk about the mental health and the conversation dialogue around it. I think it was last year or the year before, Georgia was ranked 50th, well, even behind Columbia, even behind DC on funding and support for mental health for its residents. And so and that was in the midst of COVID. And there's just, and also as architects, I think that we look at code books and we look at the built environment around us. We're talking about physical features and attributes, and we have a stair tread that's supposed to be within this range that proportionally fits our foot, an average foot of, usually a lot of those were built around an average white male was what those codes were around. But what we look at is those were physical attributes. But what I think we're trying to get across today is the mental impact that it has on you when you step on that tread, and what does the lighting feel like and the sound feel like and the environment that you're in when you're walking on that stair tread, when you walk into that stair hall, and then amplify that by everything in our built environment around us. Mindy, let's go to you a little bit on your health perspective. Can you describe why architecture for health is so imperative beyond just healthcare for architects? I think we're touching on that a bit, but let's get into your perspective.
Wait, can you clarify when you say
Question is, can you describe why architecture for health is so imperative from your perspective, the built environment?
Yeah. Can we make the built environment bigger? Like
Community.
the whole built environment
Yes,
Okay,
the earth, the world, our environment.
the world, yes. So I think didn't Erin lay it all out for us? The whole thing, right? She said it's the whole thing, right? So let's just take redlining. So redlining is created in 1937 and is imposed on all the major cities in the United States. And if you go to the homepage of the Mapping Inequality Project, what you see is the over 200 cities that are redlined are basically all the major cities in the United States. And people talk about it as redlining, but that's really a misnomer, because what happens is that these sort of down marks to whole sections of cities, there's very little green or blue, which are the places you're supposed to invest in the American city writ large. So what did they do? They left the city with all the investment and with the wealthy people and built the suburbs. So it was an abandonment of the whole city. Redlining it's a very important misnomer because it says, oh, this is just about Black people, so that's sad, but not really that important. But actually, it's about the abandonment of the American city. What's a better name for it? Psychiatrists become very involved with what's the right name. But think about that. You abandon all the American cities, all of them, all of them. Look at that map. It's terrifying. So how does that leave us a powerful, inventive country? It doesn't. And so gradually we've lost our place. Think about how much infant mortality it is and where we are in those rankings. Think about math and science, right? How are you going to get people into architecture if they don't know any math and science? They don't even believe there is science. So if they don't believe in gravity, they cannot build buildings. You cannot let them. You must not let them. So, so we have created a built environment. I think it's very important then to think about the built environment of the agricultural world. People always say to me, oh, when you talk about displacement, are you talking about rurals? Yeah, of course. Agribusiness sweeps in, pushes everybody out of the rural communities, creates these factory farms, which are bad for the environment on 20 different levels. So the built environment is where we live, it's where we love, it's where we procreate. And if it is stratified so that not everybody can be healthy, we can't be a healthy society. We can't be an inventive society. Most importantly, if we can't live together, we can't talk to each other about problems. And this is the biggest crisis that we face now, because we have really big problems to which we have no answers. And what are people doing? They're fighting. And Congress is the symbolic version of the fight. But that fight is going on everywhere at every level. We are not having a helpful conversation about solutions. We're a dysfunctional nation at this point. So the built environment is really the royal highway. How do we start to create connectedness? So that's why for us, getting $150 million reinvested in the parks of Northern Manhattan was about connection, because those parks were borderlands, and now they're places of flow. Stairs are repaired, playing fields are reopened. So they help neighborhoods come together. This is fundamental.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think I want our audience to know too, that we will get even more into ways that we can help combat some of the things that we're seeing right now. We're getting into kind of the discussion topics and the things we need to address. And then we'll get into a bit more of things to keep in mind and skill sets and some takeaways that we can have as a group. Ashley, let's jump to you. And I'm curious, let's see. I'm curious if you have an example of a challenge that you've faced related to mental health and equitable design in your work or daily life. I know Mindy we talked about the whole environment, and I want to see if there's maybe a real life example that you can give us that you've experienced. I'm curious what your approach was to overcome that challenge.
Yeah. So the way that I interface with kind of mental health and equitable design in my work, it often presents itself as a community that has suffered trauma, historic trauma, and is and then they have present behaviors and kind of social norms that have established because of those traumas that are preventing them from being able to, like Mindy said, talk to each other, be able to collaborate with each other, and to kind of think past the present and what's in front of them, and to begin to see a future that they can't see. And I think we take this for granted often as architects, that we are able to kind of, oh, this is what it could be. But kind of the exercise of speculative fiction for people is not something that they often do. And so, you have to go through layers of understanding, what has happened. You can't talk about the future until you really unpack why the community is the way they are now. So for instance, in southwestern Pennsylvania, we have a legacy of, the steel industry, heavy manufacturing, we're an energy exporter. So that's really taxing on the environment in many ways. And also, when you think about these large corporations and very small municipalities, they have the kind of structure and the financing and the decision making of countries, of small countries, and they are navigating a relationship with a small municipality who does. There's an ingrained power imbalance there, and so when those industries are kind of moving in and moving out, those communities are feeling those shocks and stressors of that economic. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's harmed their environment, but it's also allowed them to participate in the economy. So when that comes and goes, they're kind of left they're left in the wings. And so there's kind of a disheartenment and an attachment to the same kind of thing that both benefited and traumatized them at the same time. And navigating what does that relationship look like? Because some places still have, we still have industry in southwestern Pennsylvania. What's the right relationship? It's not to say that the country doesn't need it. The country does need it. But how do we, again, it's about conversations and mitigating. And so what you see also is, if we're talking about health for people, mental health, there's also physical health and the health of the environment. There's environmental degradation that affects your mental and physical health as well. Having poor air quality, having poor water quality, having limited access to food deserts, not being able to afford energy, and like these are all, there's the technical aspect of it, of the infrastructure, developing the infrastructure and the systems and designing those things, but there's also the interface between those systems and people. How are they, what is the behavior that they currently have for them to be suited to the technology? Does the technology need to shift to adjust to the behavior? Do we need to develop a culture where people can kind of introduce themselves to new technology? So for instance, if we're having, let's do energy. If we have, say, electric cars per se, and we have this mandate nationally where we're switching into electric vehicles, what does that mean for charging stations? What does that mean for gas stations? Who's able to access an electric vehicle now? There's a technology issue where how are we going to be able to distribute and kind of organize or redesign our energy system? And then how do we ensure that everyone is able to benefit from those energy systems? So that's an example of a potential conflict. But we do kind of navigate that, as well as land use, as well as housing, so being able to kind of grapple with their past through, okay, you haven't had parks in the past. This is why dilapidated parks. This is the story we'll develop to for grant funding opportunities so you could develop your park. That was a little bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah.
It was great. And I think it helps bring the macro and micro kind of scales together. I want to bring it a little bit to the, we are put on here today with the Young Architects Forum. And I want to ask a question that's pertaining to, well, I shouldn't say if it pertains to young architects. I want to bring it to that level and discuss how young architects might combat some of these situations. I know that when we look at mental health and architecture, and Mindy touched a bit on this with the health of us as architects in our workplace environment is kind of one avenue. And then the other avenue, which we are really diving a lot into today, is the environment that we are in. So both as a person and an individual, and as an architect, a steward of the health, safety, and welfare of our environment and the people that reside in it. As young architects, see how I want to phrase this question. Erin, let's bounce it to you first. As young architects, when we see, the question I hear often is, what can young architects do in the work environment when they are having a situation that they wish to discuss? What I'd like to ask it more specifically this time is, when a young architect is having a situation that they feel does not coincide with what they believe is best for the environment in which they are serving, what are some good tools that you could provide young architects to handle that situation in the work environment? So
Ashley's nodding.
Better, but if you get my
go
gist,
for
then.
it.
Yeah, go for it.
You look ready to take this
I'm
question.
anticipatory of your answer.
Okay. Let me there was a lot packed into that question. I'm trying to, because the word situation could mean like 8 million things, from like feeling like a community is being neglected to feeling like you are being violated by a colleague. So it's really hard to answer that. I mean,
And you're not the one in charge, let's say, that there's
yeah, of course,
management to answer to and a client to answer to. What do we do?
I mean, I guess, okay, I'm just gonna like uber simplify, which I think is early in my career, probably before I would even say I had a career. I got really clear on what my personal values were, and what I stood for and what I wanted to spend my time doing. And for myself, where I was willing to understand that I am just one part of a system, and where I can have change. And I think I have tried my best to consistently make decisions using that. I have it on my wall, and I regularly reassess, am I still following what feels true to be my North Arrow? So, every situation has trade-offs, and I think it would be Pollyannish to pretend that it doesn't. And I also think that's why, obviously in all of your free time, but like why it's important to do things that just light you up and matter, and to advocate, to show up for things that you care about, even if you're not able to do those as a part of your day-to-day job. And I also think it's really important to continually reflect, and like, if your job consistently does not, meet your North Arrow, how can you find another path that will, and don't give up on that. So, yeah.
Ashley, did you have anything you wanted to add to it?
Yeah. So I feel like one thing, it is important to have allies, people that agree with you and are able to kind of speak with you in the room. There's also the idea of, not being afraid to hear the first no. So, and really listening to why people are saying no. Because sometimes, there are ways you can get around that, or, oh, well, if we do this, then what could it be, a maybe? And And then there's the, if there's an, that's difficult as well, finding other rooms where you can have a platform to say the thing. Because if you're representing kind of an organization, a third party organization, you have influence, even though it's not necessarily directly in your firm. You begin to have a platform that can help you have a little bit more leverage in those conversations as well.
I
Thank you.
couldn't agree more.
Yeah, thank you both. I found in my own personal environment that at times when I didn't share the things that I felt or needed or that gave me passion and drive, that I didn't end up having as successful of an outcome. And that people really did want to lend support. But if I did not share or express, they did not know that support could be lent. I had 3 miscarriages, 2 during COVID and 1 prior. And the isolation that we've talked about today really impacted the second 2. And when I was in an environment where I would want to be passionate about moving the needle forward for women in architecture and advocating for mental health and advocating for inclusive environments and the age range that we are when we get registered, there's so much to unpack there. And when I held it in, or when I was isolated and did not feel free from threat to be able to express that, was when there was was actually when those that would have supported me were not able to support me. So I do hope that we can all, when we part today, try and encourage that open environment to allow people, young architects, all practitioners, all stewards of the environment, to really promote and encourage that conversation and support each other in the first no, because no's happen, and understand why, and the respect of all around us. Mindy, to you, how do you believe young architects can encourage practices and policies to improve workplace culture? So I know we've talked about the built environment, but let's dig a little bit into that workplace culture for young architects. What are some things that you would provide as guidance or tips for young architects?
Well, you'll remember that Erin pointed out that social engagement and third spaces happen at every level of scale, from the water cooler to Central Park. And so I think that's very important, that one is creating the world in every space that you enter. There's a book that I highly recommend to young architects. Yes, see, Erin has her pen. It's called The Power of Nunchi, which is spelled Nunchi. And it's this Korean secret to success. And the Korean, it's a really cool book. You can read it in an hour. Yes, you really want to read this book. It'll change your life. The Korean secret to success is really 2 things. Read the room. And the second part is make the room better. Whatever room you enter, make it better. So it's, the idea being that how are you going to make the room function? How do you move towards the wholeness of the room? And the reason this is good for young architects is that the author of the book, somebody says, what is the name of the book? The Power of Nunchi, Nunchi. Maybe somebody could write that in the chat. Uni Hong, who's the author of the book, says that among other times this Nunchi was so important was during Japanese colonialism, when Japanese imperialism was trying to stamp out everything Korean, and people were really trying to hold on to being Korean. So it's really about the power of people who are one down, as we like to say in family therapy. So young architects are one down, but that doesn't mean you're powerless. So take your power, and the power of Nunchi is just it's just a lovely description of how to have power when you're one down. So you're walking towards the water cooler, and there are 2 other people there. You're entering the room. How do you make that room as positive, that room of the water cooler? How do you add to it? How do you help the people who are there? And by the time you get to the top of the firm, few years down the road, you're going to be a very positive influence. So that's my 2 cents. Uni Han, Power of Nunchi. You weren't expecting that, were you?
No, and I love a good reference. And one is asking for the book reference. So thank you. Aaron, did you have some?
Yeah, can I just add, yeah, like after Ashley, I was thinking so much of like the more that you can seek to understand the audience that you're speaking to and speak in their language. And then Mindy said it in the most profound, amazing way of the book that I can't wait to read. So, I mean, it is that, like sometimes I feel like we shake our fists and say, nobody understands. And I'm like, well, you could communicate. Like, why don't you keep trying to communicate in different ways and see like where you can nudge and where you have a lever to move, because we all have levers to move.
We all have levers to move. Another,
But we can't move all levers. So
but we can't move all levers.
all the coping strategists really basically will teach you the serenity prayer. So that's the other secret.
That's a good one.
You can't move all the levers, but you can move some.
That's great. So getting to some of our panel or some of our audience attendees today have asked questions. I know we've covered kind of some of them generally speaking, but to all of our panelists, I'm going to try and get to as many as we can. The audience wants to know, how do you all practice mental wellness in your daily lives? What are roadblocks to mental health that you have seen in your daily lives? So Ashley, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I could take a stab at it. Can you repeat the question one more time? Sorry.
Sure. How do you all practice mental wellness in your daily lives? Do you run across any roadblocks while doing that?
So something that nourishes me is being around and enjoying other people's art in its many forms. So especially music. Like music is huge for me. And you know, I think as at a certain point, sometimes you can forget yourself and why you're doing what you're doing in the nitty-gritty of doing all the things, and being able to tap back into, I guess it's grounding, like tapping back into what makes you tick, what brings you enjoyment. You know, one is kind of like me just receiving. Like I don't want to work, I don't want to create, I just want to just enjoy. That's part of it. And then another aspect is just, so I like to volunteer. Like I like helping for free. I like bonding with other people around doing things with each other. I've expended a lot of free labor just because. And you know, something that's not necessarily technical but hands-on, preferably. Like, but you know, doesn't always help. Sometimes I just need to cry. Sometimes I just need to cry and then, you know, come back, eat good food.
I think that's so healthy. That's so healthy.
If you saw the amount I binge watch Netflix, you wouldn't say that. Or my Grubhub account, but like, you know, whatever it takes, I guess.
I love it. Aaron, what about you?
I mean, how do I preserve mental well-being and remove roadblocks? With a full commitment to doing so and using every resource in my arsenal. From, you know, I feel like the evidence base is really strong and it tells you most of what you need to know. I have strong connections with friends. I build more when I move, which I seem to do a lot. I exercise every day. I meditate every morning. I go on long walks in nature, and I try to get enough sleep and eat healthy foods. So I'm kind of
there's
committed.
the 24 hours right there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mindy, what about you?
Well, I just wanted to share a link to an article in today's New York Times. Where I work at the new school, where the part-time faculty are on strike. And so sometimes it's very important to join with the collective to protest injustice. And the new school has been behaving, the administration has been behaving atrociously. The full-time faculty, which I'm a member of, has refused to cross the picket line. And now they want to stop everybody's pay. So it's going to become a very bitter fight. And we all believe that we're fighting, we and the faculty believe that we're fighting for what we value, what we love about this place. And so sometimes you have to take to the streets and protest in one way or another. And it's our collective power that keeps us mentally sane. It's very, I'm not in the part-time faculty, I'm in the full-time faculty, but it's very good for me to walk the picket line once a week.
You stand up, you show up, and you speak up.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, you shout.
You shout. I love that. I always try to tell my team members and my friends and colleagues that take a minute to do something for yourself before you start every day, whatever that is, just something for yourself. Before you give to others, give to yourself. You got to replenish that, and then you can give more freely to all those around you, because there's so many people that are asking for our time in all that we do. There's a lot of demand on society today, especially young architects, social and at work and family and friends and all of it. So give to yourself, give that bucket first. Okay, I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question if we can. This comes from the audience. Over the past 5 or so years, there has begun to be a destigmatization of addressing mental health deficiencies, but by no means has it become normalized, or is it fully funded in the way it should be, as you all have addressed. How do you think we will address mental health in the next 5 years and then 20 years in the future? Or how do you want to see us address mental health in those points of time? So I'm hearing kind of 2 questions. How do you think we're going to address it in the future? How do you want to see it addressed? Right, Mindy, let's go to you. Let's jump to you first on this one.
The rates of mental illness is different from mental health, but the rates of mental illness are really what we're talking about today. And mental illness is dependent on the state of the world. So if there's a lot of violence and trauma, people get anxiety, they get depression, they get post-traumatic stress disorder. Think about those numbers of mass shootings. Every time you open the paper, there's another mass shooting. So what is that doing to all the school children in America? One of the things they say is school children have had more active shooter drills than fire drills. Well, that's just horrific. So that stays with you for a lifetime. If we make an environment that's conducive to mental health, as we shift to that supportive, inclusive, loving environment, rates of mental illness go down and people have room to express themselves. So you're changing both things, mental illness and mental health. So, what I would like to see is a society in which everybody is mentally healthy, has room to be themselves and to contribute, and a society in which we can collectively solve our problems. That's what I would like to see.
That's so well stated. Erin, what about you?
Sorry, I was so blown away with what Mindy said. I'm just trying to write down your quotes as quickly as possible and think about how to integrate them into upcoming papers. But
this is being recorded, so that's
I'll punt to Ashley. I mean, I have the personality I'm born with. So no, I mean, yeah. Go ahead, Ashley.
Where do you want to see mental health in the future?
Well, what I would like to see is significant commitment to supporting mental health for societies. I don't think anyone would publicly say that they don't care about the public mental health, but it's usually deep within policy and economic policy and where are investments that really matter when it comes to making shifts. And so, what that looks like is greater investment in public housing, greater investment in ecological restoration, greater investment in programs for people, access to healthcare. As a basis, public transportation, free public transportation. Like, it shouldn't, the cost to live and the access to space should be more inclusive, and that can only be done with capital and policy change, in my opinion.
That's perfectly stated. Thank you. Erin, let's hear.
I would just say both of you just like so perfectly captured ways that we need to change. And I would just say, what I didn't hear us necessarily talking about is normalization. Like, if I could change one thing in the way that we communicate, we would talk about it like diabetes or cancer or heart disease, and understand that it is not a choice and it is not a weakness. It is a part of human beings. And that would be mine. Yeah.
Understand that we are designing not for a generalized group, but an individuals. When you meet one child with autism, someone said that once in a previous webinar I was on, you are designing for one child with autism, not the entirety. That you cannot generalize it. So that's so important as well. And with that, I hate to end this. I feel like we have so much more to unpack and talk about, but I do want to thank the Young Architects Forum for allowing us to be on here today. And I'll let Laura kind of close this out.